Hello everyone, my name is Braden, this is Airless Quill 9, and in today's video we're going to talk about the whimsical draconic tricksters known as the Faerie Dragons. So Faerie Dragons are these cat-like pranksters. They are really cat-sized as well, and they come complete with draconic features, butterfly-like wings, and scales of warm hues as youths and cool hues as adults. So there are an adult and a youth version of Faerie Dragons, and I have changed up the format of this video a little bit because the way that Faerie Dragons were in 2014 was hard to really give a direct comparison on the stat block changes. So I'm actually going to start with what differences there are in 2014 to 2024 first. So the format is going to be slightly different in that way. So I was only able to do like a generalization of what changes have been made here, but I am going to point out what main differences there are. First off, in 2014 we had one stat block, and then that stat block would give a Faerie Dragon different changes based on the color that the Faerie Dragon was. Its color determined what its age category was as well. So an older Faerie Dragon had access to more spells and a younger one did not. In 2024, we don't have a mechanic like that. Instead, we now have two stat blocks. Color no longer matters other than in the actual description. Youths have warm hues and adults have cool hues. And because there are two separate stat blocks, we now have a youth stat block and an adult stat block. Also, in 2014, the bite attack only dealt 1 piercing damage, so it did not have a huge offensive presence. In 2024, the bite damage does deal some additional. And the adult stat block, the CR2 version, they deal 10 average damage. And then the youth version, the CR1 stat block, deals 7 average damage. And this is actually a combination of both piercing and psychic damage. So yeah, you can see here the damage in the stat blocks has basically gone up by 7 and 10 times the amount. So yeah, that's pretty huge change there. In 2014, as I stated before, the spellcasting list changed based on the color of the Faerie Dragon. However, in 2024, we now have a set spellcasting list for each of the different age categories, both the youth and the adult. So that is another change there. Also, in 2014, the Faerie Dragon had an armor class of 15 and 14 hit points. In 2024, that is quite different. The youth version, the CR1 version, has an armor class of 14 and 21 hit points. And the adult version, the CR2 version, has an armor class of 15 and 35 hit points. So quite major increases either way for both of those. And then the final interesting change in the stat blocks is in 2014, the Euphoria Breath either prevented actions and forced movement, or prevented the target from moving and forced a wisdom save at the end of each of the creature's turns. So that has been changed, and I wrote 2015 here, it's supposed to be 2024. But in the 2024 version of the Euphoria Breath, the target instead on a failed save becomes incapacitated for 1 minute, and then they have to repeat that save to end the condition. So yeah, these are the real changes to the Faerie Dragon stat blocks. Quite major changes in my opinion. They are quite different stat blocks. It was really hard for me to accurately portray in each of these what the main changes were, so I decided to format it this way instead. But with that being said, we are now going to look at the 2024 stat block. So let's go ahead and get straight to it. All right, so the Faerie Dragon Youth is a tiny dragon with a chaotic good alignment. They have an armor class of 13, an initiative of +3. They have 21 hit points, a speed of 10 feet, and a fly speed of 60 feet. For their ability scores, they have a strength of 3, a dexterity of 16, a constitution of 12, an intelligence of 12, a wisdom of 12, and a charisma of 14. For their skills, they have Arcana +3, Perception +3, and Stealth +5. They have 60 feet of dark vision and a passive perception of 13. For their languages, they know Draconic, Sylvan, and they have a telepathy of 60 feet that allows them to speak only with other fairy dragons. The youth stat block is a challenge rating 1 stat block, which means it has 200 experience points and a proficiency bonus of +2. For the trait section, the Faerie Dragon has magic resistance, allowing it to have advantage on saving throws against spells and other magical effects. So that is quite nice there. And the actions portion, we have the bite attack, which, as I said, is now dealing, well, first off, it has a +5 to hit now, and it reaches 5 feet, and it now deals 1d4 +3 piercing damage, plus 1d4 psychic damage. So not as pitiable as before. The Faerie Dragon Youth also has Euphoria Breath, which is on a recharge of 5 to 6. It is a wisdom saving throw, DC 12. Each creature in a 15-foot cone is affected. And on a failure, the target has the incapacitated condition until the end of its next turn, and it uses all of its movement on its turn to move in a random direction. Alright, in the spell casting section, the dragon casts one of the following spells, requiring no material components, and using Charisma as a spellcasting ability. Spell save DC 12. And at will, it can cast Dancing Lights, Mage Hand, and Minor Illusion. But finally, we come to the bonus action section, and this gives us superior invisibility. So the dragon casts greater invisibility on itself, requiring no spell components, and using the same spellcasting ability as spellcasting. So this gives the Faerie Dragon basically a bonus action invisibility that, granted, does not drop regardless of what the Faerie Dragon does on his turn, because greater invisibility is the best version of invisibility, because it does not drop whenever we make attacks or affect other creatures. So that is quite nice. Also, it is also a important thing to note that the superior invisibility does not require any spell components, and that does mean that it cannot be counterspelled by players. So keep that in mind as well. So yeah, this is the youth stat block. Pretty interesting. I like the format of it. It is a much cleaner stat block than the 2014 version, and I feel like this will last a tiny bit longer if they do get in combat, and it does give it some tiny bit more interesting things that happen on its turn. Alright, now we can take a look at the adult stat block. So major changes here. It is still a tiny dragon, still chaotic good. It now has an armor class of 15 and a +5 to initiative. Hit points are now increased to 35. They still have the same movement speeds, a 10-foot walking and a fly speed of 60. Ability scores, they have a strength of 3, dexterity 20, constitution 13, intelligence 14, wisdom 12, and charisma 16. In the skills section, they have arcana at +4, perception at +3, and stealth at +7. Senses, they still have dark vision 60 feet, and a passive perception of 13. Languages, still know Draconic and Sylvan, and they have the telepathy of 60 feet that targets Faerie Dragons only. And the adult is a challenge rating 2 stat block. This gives it 450 experience points, but still retaining a proficiency bonus of +2. In the traits, we can see that we still have the magic resistance trait. And then when we go into the action section, you see that the bite attack is now a +7 to hit, and it now deals 1d4 plus 5 piercing plus 1d6 psychic damage. So there is a damage increase there. The Euphoria Breath does function very similar to the Youth. However, there are some noticeable changes. First off, the DC has gone up to 13. And then on a failure now, the target has the incapacitate condition and it repeats the save at the end of each of its turns, ending the effect on itself on a success. After 1 minute, it succeeds automatically. However, while incapacitated, the target uses all of its movement on each of its turns to move in a random direction. So, in the adult, the duration of the effect has increased, and that is really the only main change there. In spellcasting, though, we do have some new goodies. The spell save DC has gone up to DC 13, and then at will, we can still cast Dancing Lights, Mage Hand, and Minor Illusion. However, once per day each, we can now cast Hallucinatory Terrain and Polymorph, which are fun spells, especially Hallucinatory Terrain. And then in the bonus action section, we still have that Superior Invisibility, which requires no spell components and still uses the same spellcasting ability as spellcasting. So the adult is just a tiny bit beefier version of a Faerie Dragon and has a little bit more potent abilities than the youth version does, which honestly makes perfect sense. But yeah, you can see here that the adult is just a little bit more of a challenge than the youth. But now that we have two separate age categories, this does give us some options in terms of when we can use Faerie Dragons and what they will be able to do dependent on how old they are. I feel like that's a much better way to categorize them than by color, even though color does technically retain its usage because in the description it still states that youths are the warm colors and the adults are the cool colors. So still, color still plays a factor in the lore aspect of these stat blocks. Alright, so that is going to be it for Faerie Dragon. So thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. And thank you all. I'll see you in the next one.